Hi everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Big Life Mindset. The experience I'm about to share really messed me up for a while, so in order to speak to it properly, we'll run a little over our normal time. That said, I'm confident that many of you out there will have either experienced the same thing or you know someone that is going through a similar situation. In 2010, I worked at a government ministry and I was getting bullied at work. It reached a stage where I was exhausted. I couldn't sleep and my confidence in myself was absolutely shattered. Now, this isn't a woe is me story or even a story of how good triumphs over evil. In fact, I've actually been through a phase at school where I was a bully, so this definitely isn't a pity party either. Rather, this is my experience of being bullied in the workplace and how you can regain control of the situation if it's ever happening to you. The ministry at the time was reflective of any other. There's a lot of good people, many the very definition of a public servant, trying to do their best as a small cog in a big machine. My boss at the time, who also hired me, was the bully, and played the role to perfection and in an environment that allowed this kind of behaviour to flourish. Now, I want to put a couple of things out here. One is that the chief executive was a person that, although I didn't know personally or even really at work, struck me as someone that I admired. So much so that as a joke, one of my colleagues gave me a photo of him as a Secret Santa gift. The second thing I want to note is that if you ever see bullying or sexual harassment in the workplace, always look to whoever's top of the food chain, because it's there that you'll see how the culture and tone of the organisation is set. You'll always get an outlier, maybe someone within the business that gets away with that behaviour for a little while, but ultimately, if it's part of the culture of the business, then the buck stops where the big decisions are made. The bully is responsible for their behaviour, no doubt. But it's the chief executives or owners that provide the environment for that to happen. Whether it's because they haven't prioritised stamping out that behaviour, or they've turned a blind eye in order to get results, or constant restructures has everyone worried about their own jobs. It all comes back. So in my situation, when I was hired, I came on board and said and did all the right things. I genuinely loved what we did. I was eager to please and I couldn't get enough work under me. I really couldn't talk enough about work in my private life because of all the cool stuff we were able to help New Zealanders with. I flew through the work that was expected of me and I kept my head down, so much so that it took me a while, far too long in fact, to realise that a colleague of mine was being treated atrociously by our manager. Her desk was even placed in the centre of our workstations in a way that essentially isolated her from the rest of us. Her work was criticised, not critiqued, and openly ridiculed if there were any minor errors found. Even her perfume and personal hygiene weren't off limits for our boss. But still, I kept my head down. And that's a decision that I've regretted and carried with me to this day, knowing that I should have stood up for my colleague more. Eventually, she resigned or was dismissed, and our boss's attention turned to another colleague who had joined us from a different team. Before long, she resigned as well, followed by a friend of mine that held one of our 2 senior roles in our team. Once again, there were a lot of rinse and repeat behaviours that became the talk of our town. Eventually, I was promoted into my friend's role, and the spotlight fell on me. I went in there with what I thought were eyes wide open, knowing what my boss was capable of. I chased the promotion and I got it, yet I knew the environment I was signing up for was a terrible one. We had colleagues regularly crying at work. Our turnover of staff was high, and we all knew you had to master walking on eggshells when our manager was around. Because I'd been promoted, there was a feeling of being on the inner circle now, and for a brief while that's actually how it played out. I was one of 2 seniors supporting our manager. I always knew, though, that my co-senior sat above me in the pecking order, having been there since before I joined. Not only that, but this person had a reputation which my experience and the experience of several others validated. that they would happily push you under the bus to stay in a positive light in our manager's eyes, whether it was your mistake to own or not. Together with the manager, they had formed a relationship that was widely acknowledged as toxic, with a them versus us mentality. And so for me, it started like most bullying does, with the bully trying to work out if you're going to be a sycophant that's easily bullied, or if you're at the other end of the spectrum, an even bigger bully and so one to be avoided. Testing the boundaries came here and there with small comments, sometimes in private, but then increasingly in front of others, as, layer by layer, almost imperceptibly, it got worse. By the end of it, I was ridiculed if I asked for help or shouted at in front of the team, all the while in our open office environment. The demands had started to become more and more unrealistic too. Timeframes that had no basis in evidence or reality became the norm. We were tasked with using technology that was outdated and simply unable to do what was wanted, and on far too many occasions, I saw our boss get their way with other managers simply by being the loudest voice or the biggest bully in the room. Now, some side context. The team I sat in was critical to the business. We sat in the back end and managed all the processes, so if you wanted something done in the real world, like with the public, then eventually it had to go through ours. If a manager across the business wanted something, they needed to be sure that our manager was on side. This is great if you wanted to boost your ego about where you and your team sat in the scheme of things, but it's terrible for business harmony. The prestige and gravity our team had would only grow with more responsibilities being sucked into the team. We became a get shit done team from the outside, but the inside was horrible. The culture was septic, morale was poor, and it was obvious that each of us was just trying to stay out of our manager's crosshairs. As the workload increased, so did my hours and the stress. Because we didn't have the technology to support what was asked of us, it had to be done manually. I'm not talking 1 or 2 days a week of manually intensive tasks. I'm talking weeks and weeks of a really large team with some seriously smart cookies copying and pasting information into Excel spreadsheets. This is highly commercially sensitive information being copied line by line from multiple sources into spreadsheets that would eventually be sent out to the public. A lot of hands in each pot, people working long hours and some in poorly defined roles. The room for error was massive. You could drive a bus through it. It was glaringly obvious to all, and yet our manager still had zero tolerance for any mistakes. Any of those mistakes would often lead to a dressing down in front of the others, not something that many people are keen on experiencing. Slowly but surely, work became my life. I would be in the office at 6 a.m. and out at 7 or 8 p.m. Sometimes I would even fall asleep at my desk or get home and find my chest felt really tight, like someone was squeezing it or the muscles were getting smaller on their own. I'd often have to thump my chest with a fist hard enough that would hopefully release some of the tension. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. And in hindsight, it probably had affected my relationship with Debbie, with my friends and family, and even how I valued myself. I stopped talking about work and how much I loved it. In fact, every morning I would wake up and dread the thought of going to work. If you've ever woken up physically and mentally exhausted every morning and absolutely hated the thought of having to put yourself back into that situation, then you know what I'm talking about. This carried on for a few months when the manager announced in their traditional fashion that we needed to hit yet another unrealistic goal. I took a deep breath. If we all just keep our heads down, this will pass over. I took another deep breath. No, I decided. This wasn't going to work and I needed to step up and protect not only my sanity, but the others around me, who were all juniors except for the one I mentioned. I made sure I breathed deeply again, wanting to ensure that what I said next was done calmly. I let our manager know that what they'd asked for was not possible. We were too stretched already, and if we took on any more, we would walk into the inevitable. Critical mistakes. The manager started shouting at me, not at the top of their voice, but not far from it. I calmly countered with why the request wasn't possible, which, by the way, I was correct on, but I already knew trouble was brewing. The manager pulled me into a room, closed the door behind us, and proceeded to scream. I watched on as their face went that shade of reddy purple and their body was shaking with rage. I stood there and let it wash all around me. I didn't feel a thing other than I had completely lost any ounce of respect for this person that I once had. I even pitied them. I didn't feel intimidated. I didn't feel fearful for what might happen next. And then I realized I no longer cared about the bullying. I had broken the spell in that moment, and we both knew it. It was obvious then that I was going to be resigning, or made redundant, whatever, but my days there were limited. At around that time, it was signalled that our ministry was going to be absorbed with others to create a mega ministry, and with that, one of the last vestiges of what I loved about working at that place would be gone. And so, I began to look for another job, with my confidence and self-belief near an all-time low. I felt fragile and unsure if I was even good enough to work anywhere else. Within a month, or maybe 2, I actually landed another job, and that put me onto a path that's led me to some of the best and happiest decisions of my life. When I resigned, I could feel the weight come off me. Not all of it, mind you, but a lot of it. At my farewell, I had a huge turnout, much more than I could have hoped for, and it reinforced how many people I had the pleasure of building a connection with and what I was leaving behind. A lot of really good people. Before the day came, I had visions of what I was going to say to and about my manager. How I was going to right a lot of the wrongs that had happened not only to me, but to those before me. But I chose not to. No, I wasn't going to tarnish my own farewell with needless negativity. And honestly, I believed then, and still do, that I'm much healthier mentally for not travelling down that road. Sure, there would have been a sense of satisfaction, but my life has taught me that it's best to leave the negativity with negative people. Hey, thanks again everyone for joining me on this episode, and I hope you found it insightful. A couple of footnotes on that story. This period of time really did leave its mark on me, and not always in a positive way. I once thought I saw this manager years later while I was in a supermarket queue, and I felt my chest tighten up the same way it had before. It was a completely automatic response. I even walked away from the queue and pretended I was still shopping for something else. That's how deep that bullying had affected me. While I was at the next job, we had a person say something I'll never forget. It's perfectly okay for you to wake up one day out of every 10 and not want to go to work. That's only human nature. If, however, you find yourself feeling this 3 or 4 times out of 10, then you need to work out what you can change and change it fast. If you're experiencing this feeling more than 4 days out of 10, then you've probably overstayed your welcome, so you need to start thinking about getting out of there. If you're in this kind of situation, there's a couple of things you need to do. Firstly, talk to someone. Whether it's an EAP program, trusted friend, complete stranger, or your partner, talk to someone about it. It's far too easy to withdraw into yourself, and our minds are amazing at tearing ourselves down with negative self-talk. Talking to someone, even verbalizing it out loud on your own, can help you regain perspective. Focus on getting you better. You could spend time trash talking the manager with your colleagues, or you can use that energy on creating a better you. That could come in the form of leaving the job, which for many isn't a realistic option, reducing your hours, using your sick leave, or trying to instill good habits like regular exercise. There's going to be a lot of different ways you can help yourself get better. Pick 3 and get going. All right, everyone, thank you once again for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time. As always, if you're finding these informative or insightful, please do share with your people. Click follow and subscribe, or you can join me on Instagram at big_life_mindset. That's big life mindset. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon. All right. Peace out.